Hello everyone, welcome to another segment of our discussion on JavaScript. So for this video, I'm going to discuss about the script tag. I will also be discussing about how to put JavaScript either in the body and in the head of your HTML code. I will be discussing about how to integrate JavaScript externally into your HTML file, as well as how to display outputs in JavaScript and the many options that you can have. We will also be discussing about the different JavaScript statements, how it ends, how it works, how it behaves. And at the same time, I will also be talking about code blocks if in case you have more than one statement to include in your JavaScript code. At the same time, I will also be talking about reserved words, which are definitely words that you could not use in your variables. Alright, so let's start with the script tag. So in HTML, JavaScript code is between your script/script codes. So you might be able to find other versions of old JavaScript wherein you have to specify the type of the document. So you will be able to find type is equal to text/JavaScript, but this is no longer required because JavaScript is already the default scripting language in HTML. So therefore, it's already understood and you don't have to specify that anymore. So here is an example of a code. You have here you have a placeholder, so you have a paragraph tagged as or ID'd as a sample, and then you have a script which will specify that you're going to identify that kind of ID which is sample. So that means you're referring to this placeholder of a paragraph, and you want to specify that the value of that particular placeholder as indicated by your code that inner HTML is going to be replaced by how JavaScript works. I think you already have an idea on how this works, inner HTML works, because of the previous video that we created or that you watched before about JavaScript. So we continue. So basically JavaScript can be placed in various parts of your document. You can put it in the body, or you can put it in the head section of your HTML page, or even in both. So in this example, you have, of course, this one is inside the body. You have script/script, and this is very similar to the one that I have shown you earlier. So basically what happens here is that you have a placeholder, which is a paragraph. You identify it as sample. Initially, the value is my name is 1, so it displays my name is 1 on your screen right after the heading, which is sample JavaScript in body. So sorry you could not find it on your screen because I'm using a unlicensed version of Bandicam. But yes, just imagine that you have sample JavaScript in body on top, and then you have the default value of your placeholder paragraph, which is going to display by my name is 1. So we already identified this placeholder as an ID of sample. So we have identified it as sample. So that explains why if you're going to create a button, so this button is simply going to create this button here, and it's clickable. And how it behaves is that when you click on it, it will call function exchange name. Now function change name rather is actually a function that you have declared inside your script/script code, which is a JavaScript now. And what it does is that whenever you click this particular button, it will trigger this particular function, and that function will call, or would rather identify or look for that document that we have tagged as sample. In this case, that's the paragraph that I was talking about earlier. And you're going to replace the value, the default value of that placeholder from my name is 1 to no, actually it's Nikki. And that only happens when the button is clicked. So that's part of the behavior that will be triggered only when the button is clicked. So as you can see here in the output, if you're going to click on I think I was not able to So as you can see here, for a while, yeah, so as you can see here, it says my name is 1, and then it actually will replace it with no, actually it's Nikki. Alright, so you might want to pause this video at this point and then try out this particular code, but this is something that we already discussed in the previous video of JavaScript. Now, so that's JavaScript in the body of your HTML code. So where else can you put JavaScript? So aside from the body, you can also put it on the head. So as you can see here, inside your head/head code, you have a script here, /script code, which is the one that contains the function. So basically, we just move the script code from the body to the head, and it still works the same way. Also, it will display demo JavaScript in the head, or in head. It will display I am a Suleimanian by default. When the function or when the button try it is clicked, it will trigger and call function 1, which is a JavaScript code which you place in the head of your HTML file. So this is going to work the same way as what that's what I have shown you earlier. Okay, now you could also create an external JavaScript. So we discussed that in HTML, the extension or the file name extension is .html. Now for your JavaScript, so you have CSS, which also has an external file extension of .css. Now this time this is for JavaScript. So the extension of your file is .js. So we discussed that you could do this in Notepad. So the same thing, no? So you just create a file in Notepad. When you save it, just like what you do with HTML, you just change the file name extension to all files and then just type in .js. So this is practical when you're using a particular function, for example, in or across multiple HTML file, just like the purpose of having external CSS. So how do you create an external script? You simply start with the name of the function. So I will show you an example later on, and then you just indicate it as script source is equal to, and then the name of your external file. So here, as you can see, you have script source is equal to myscript.js. This is now the JavaScript file that you have saved externally. So that's why you don't see any function inside this HTML file. So what happens here is that my function is a function that is triggered when you click try it. But as you can see, you could nowhere find my function within this HTML file, because that function, my function, is inside or can be found in a separate external file inside my script.js. So just like what I mentioned earlier, you can put the external script reference, which is the script source /script, that could be inside your body, or inside your body /body code, or inside the head. So it will behave as if it's located on that particular part. So the script will behave as if it was located exactly where you can find the script tab. So I'm going to show you in the later on slides on how you will really write your JavaScript externally. So okay, so this is how it works. So you have here an HTML file, and then you have a JavaScript. So this is the file name for this one is who.js, and that explains why you have here an external who.js file. Now as you can see, you're just creating the function directly, and I'm writing here function 1 because that is the reference that I'm using inside my HTML file. And I'm now writing the code on how or what will happen if the user will click this button. So I'm using sample as the ID because that is where I want to put it. So that's the placeholder, the paragraph here that initially has a value of I am a Silimanian. And I'm changing it to another value, which is I am Juan. So that means once you are done writing this, so because this is saved as hood.js and you have already specified it here inside your head, and as I said, you can put it in the head or in the body. When you save your file and when you run this code, when you click on try it, it will function as if it is within your HTML code. And yes, as you can see, it's already here on your screen. And that is how your external JavaScript works. Okay, so placing scripts in external files has some advantages. So it separates your HTML from your code, which makes it a lot easier to debug if in case you're looking for some issues. It also makes your HTML and JavaScript easier to read and maintain. So remember that because you have your HTML, you still have your CSS if in case you're using internal or inline CSS. And now you have JavaScript, so it might be a lot more easier to debug, to maintain, or to understand if it is written separately. Now it can also make the speed of your page loads much faster because it already cached this JavaScript files externally. So as you can see here, you could actually create more than one JavaScript for one HTML file, and that is simply by specifying it inside your script source /script tags. So it's actually very easy. Okay, so my challenge at this point here is that I want you to create your own function name. So make your own JavaScript code that will do the following. It will add 14 and 7 and it will display 23. And now there's going to be a button that when you're going to click, it will correct that particular output and display the correct output or the correct sum, which is 21. So you're going to create your own JavaScript on the head. Now try also putting it in the body, and also try saving it as a JS or a JavaScript file externally and make each of them work. So for instance, if this is your output, so you have to say, for example, demo to display correct result. Initially you have 14 plus 7, so it will display 23 initially, and then you're going to have or create a button that says correct it or anything similar, and when you click on that particular button, it should display the correct value, which is 21. Okay, so that's going to be your challenge, and with that I want you to pause your video first and try it out. Okay, so I asked you to create three, to create a JavaScript in the head, in the body, and externally. I will just give you one solution to out of the three, and it's up to you to figure out the rest because it's actually very easy. So here I have a placeholder, which is a paragraph. I call it demo, and I display or give it an initial value, which is 14 plus 7 is 23, and that's going to be the default value that will be displayed on your web page when you run it. Now you have a button, and the button is going to be calling a function called function change sum whenever it is clicked. So that's why you have here on click is equal to function change sum. So it will call that particular function, and the label of that particular button is called correct it. So that means you will see the initial output, which is the wrong output of 24 plus 7 is equal to 23. And then you have a button. Once the button is clicked, it will call function change sum, and it will replace the value of that placeholder, which is the paragraph here on top. It will change the value to 14 plus 7 is 21. And that's how easy it is to create the challenge that I gave you earlier. So if you have not done that successfully, you might want to correct your code at this point. Maybe if you have already done some of them, you might want to transfer the script from the body. This is in the body. You can try putting the same code in the head portion of your HTML code, or perhaps you would transfer this in a JS or JavaScript file externally and refer it as an image or as a script source. Okay, I hope you have done everything that I asked you to do in this video, and so far I hope that you made it work, in calling the JavaScript internally and externally. So at this point of our discussion, I'm going to talk about how you could use JavaScript to display an output, so whatever it is, and we could we actually already know how to display or how to use inner HTML, which is the first part of our discussion, and then we will discuss other options, which is using document.write and document.alert, as well as console.log. So let's start with the first one, which is the inner HTML. So we already have been using this since the first video on JavaScript, and I'm sure that you are very familiar with this already. So you can use document.get element by ID, and that's how you specify that is the placeholder that you want to use, or as the placeholder that you want to use, or the placeholder where you want the output to be produced or displayed. So you have the ID, which identifies which HTML document will be used as a placeholder, and then you have the inner HTML property, which defines the value or the content of that HTML element. So as you can see here, you have a placeholder P, so which is identified as sample. It doesn't have any output by default, but when you display, or when it runs the code script, so this time there is no button that will be triggered, so automatically it will this script will be performed regardless of what happens. So you have document.get element by ID. You specify that it's going to be the sample, which is the paragraph here, and then it will specify that the value of inner HTML, or the value of that placeholder, will be this value. Now in this case, because this is a mathematical formula, not just an output, or not just a text that you want to be displayed, unlike in the previous examples. In this case here, you're simply adding 1900 plus 1, and that will display 1901 on your screen. So when you run this code, because it doesn't have any button, automatically the output that you will see on your screen is sample web page, year Silliman started, and then 1901. There is no need for you to click anything for the 1901 or for this script to be performed. So changing the inner HTML property, which has been discussed, as mentioned, since the beginning of our discussion in JavaScript, is a very common way to display data in HTML. So please try this one out and pause the video for a while. The next way that we could somehow get output in JavaScript is using your document.write. So normally, document.write is only used for testing purposes, as what you will see later on, because when you use document.write, it will clear all the previous outputs of your HTML code. So for instance, if you have here using document.write, okay, so it will be displayed as a heading, and then you have a paragraph which is going to display sample paragraph, and then you have another paragraph, the second one, which will display never use the document.write method. After the document has loaded, the whole document will be overwritten. So it will be displayed on your screen. Now as you can see, you have here a script. Now so the script is going to display or to write 1900 plus 1, and it will display 1900. Now what's the difference, right? So if you're going to use a button and place and trigger, let the button trigger document.write, this is what will happen. So you have using document.write, and then you have a sample output in a paragraph, and then you have a button, and the button is going to be labeled as try it, and then it will trigger on click document.write, and then it will perform the formula 1900 plus 1. So what happens is this. So when I click on that, it will display 1901 and clear the previous output, which were your heading 2 and your paragraph. So only 1901 will be displayed on your screen. So that's exactly what will happen to your website if you use document.write. So that explains why, as mentioned earlier, we only use document.write for testing purposes. Say if you want to see what's the value of a particular variable, then you can use document.write to check what's the value of that particular variable at that particular point of your code. So you might want to try this one as well. So pause your video for a while. Alright, the next discussion I will share with you on displaying something on your screen in JavaScript is the window.alert. So you can use the alert box to display the data. So what happens here is that you have your sample display, which is a heading, and then you have the paragraph that will display using window.alert. So you are using a script that will display the result of 10 plus 21. And so what will happen is that it will display a dialog box that will display the output of 10 plus 21, which is 31. So note that instead of using window.alert, you could already omit the word window and just replace it with alert. So try to run this one, and we will be able to see a window that will pop up and display the result of your equation here, which is 5 plus 6. So kindly try this one out and see what will happen when you load your HTML code in your browser. The next one is using console.log. So this is only for debugging purposes, very similar to your what I explained earlier, which is your document.write. So it's also for debugging or testing purposes, and that's the purpose of your console.log. So we don't normally use this one. So what happens is that when you use console.log, you have to press F12 on your keyboard, and that will activate the debugging screen, just like when you press F12 when you open any website for that matter. The console should be selected in your debugger menu, and then you need to run again so that you could see the result of 1900 plus 1. Okay, the next one is your JavaScript print. So this will actually trigger the print option, much like when you press Ctrl P on any website or in any word processor, for instance. So what happens is it will display the heading, which will be the window.print method, and then it will display a text or a paragraph that will display click to print the current page. And then once the print button is clicked, because this is a behavioral which is only going to be triggered when you click print, it will open a preview of this particular website, and it will allow you to print using the selected printer that is connected to your computer. So you might want to try this one out as well, and this is another way to generate an output in JavaScript. Okay, so those were the ways on how to generate outputs in JavaScript. The next discussion is on JavaScript statements. So here you have a heading that will display JavaScript statements, and then you have identified a placeholder called sample. Then you have a script. It's a script that will automatically be performed, but it will not be displayed on your screen. It's also not a comment because it will be working behind the scenes. So what happens here is you are actually declaring a variable. So it's like programming in any other language, programming language for that matter. So when you declare a variable, you simply say let and then you specify the name of your variable. So very similarly, you cannot start a variable name with a number, you cannot have two words, etc. We will discuss what are the valid variable names and what is not valid in another video. But for now, so let's just remember that there should only be one word for one variable. If you have more than one variable, you have to separate it with a comma. And if you have a number on that variable, it should not be the starting character of your variable name. So we have here num1, num2, and sum. So just like any programming language or programming class, I always assume or I always advise that the variable name should somehow be able to describe what is inside that variable or what will be placed inside that variable later on. So this is your statement 1. So there are actually 4 statements here. So your statement 1 is a declaration of your 3 variables. As mentioned, we separate the variables with a comma, we end it with a semicolon. So you could also have more than one declaration. So you can say let num1 and then semicolon, let num2 semicolon, let sum semicolon, or you can put it all at once like this, separated by a comma. And then after you have already declared the variables, you can give it an initial value using your assignment operator, just like any other programming language. So here you're assigning 12 to num1, you're assigning 18 to num2, and you're simply adding these two values together and storing the result to sum. Now none of these are being displayed on your website, or your web page. Now it will only be displayed if you use placeholder. So you have here document.getElementById sample. So again, the placeholder sample refers to this paragraph here, and that is where you want to display. So notice that initially here, while you have identified this placeholder as a sample, it doesn't have any text, so it doesn't display anything. Now after doing the calculation, that's when you specify that the placeholder sample with reference to its attribute inner HTML, it will have a value of the value of sum is. Now it is enclosed in double quotes because it is a text. Now this one is a plus sign. That means you want to add to your text because you want to display it inside your placeholder paragraph. Is going to be added with the value of the sum. So since 12 plus 18 is 30, the value of sum is now 30, and that will be added, or that will be appended to your text. The value of sum is, and that's how you display the value of sum is 30. So take note here that after displaying 30, which is the value of your sum, you have another plus sign, which will again add a text portion of your value for your paragraph here with a period. So that's why you have a period after the value of your sum. So end it with a semicolon, and of course don't forget to end your script with a /script code. So this one, it doesn't need any trigger to be displayed. So once you run this code, automatically the output is going to be displayed on your screen. Now so basically you have learned that when you say JavaScript program, it's a list of instructions that will be performed by the computer. In a programming language, these are called statements. So that's why I mentioned earlier that all statements end with a semicolon. And a JavaScript program is a list of statements. So as you can see here, and as what you will see in the later examples, you can have more than one line as your programming statement in JavaScript. So this one is another example. Again, the placeholder is called sample, and then here you will simply change or replace the value of your placeholder ID as sample, change it with check this out. So as you can see here, it will display JavaScript statements. It will display, this is an example. You have here another paragraph, the second paragraph that is identified as sample. It doesn't have any initial value, but when it gets to perform the script, that particular placeholder or paragraph will have a value of check this out. Okay, so that's why this is the output that you will see when you run this code. So as what you have noticed in these examples here, we end our JavaScript statements with semicolons. Okay, so just like in the previous example. So note that HTML does not end with a semicolon, but our JavaScript statements always end with a semicolon. Another thing is that when separated by semicolons, multiple statements in one line are allowed. So for instance, if you're going to create this code here, so these are individual statements that ends with a semicolon. If you're going to put this one together, as long as it ends with a semicolon, that will still work correctly. So if you're going to replace this code with this line, wherein all assignment statements are in one line. So as you can see here, num1 is equal to 45, num2 is equal to 32, difference is equal to num1 plus num2. Well, supposedly that should have been minus, but this is a sum, not the difference. But in any case, all of these three statements are in one line because each of them ends with a semicolon. So as long as they end with a semicolon, putting them in one line is still acceptable in JavaScript. Okay, so it doesn't matter. Now, okay, so it says here, on the web you might see examples that does not have any semicolon. Now, ending statements with semicolon is not required, but it is highly recommended. So, just to set the standard for all our examinations or checkpoints in the future, you are expected to have a semicolon and you will get a deduction if you don't end it with a semicolon. So please don't forget, all your JavaScript statements should end with a semicolon. Okay guys, so I hope you tried it out by testing all the codes that you have seen in the previous slides. Now let me give you tips on how to use statements in JavaScript. So again, a script disregards extra spaces. So even if you put more than one space in between the words, or if you omit the spaces, that will still be interpreted the same way. But it's going to be a better way of writing programs in JavaScript if you add white space. So please just add white spaces. It will also be a lot easier to understand and to debug. Now, placing spaces around operators is also a good idea, and again, it's not required, but please do it. Now, also, programmers frequently want to keep the code lines around 80 characters because that will make the code a lot easier to understand and to read. And also, there is, there's always a standard that the code is less than 80, because longer than that, that means it's a very complicated text. So you can break that down into smaller codes. However, if you really need to put a particular long code into 2 lines, it is recommended that we end it with an operator. So for instance, here you have document.getElementById and then demo.innerHTML. Because the rest of the value hello dolly could no longer fit in one line, it is suggested that if you need to break down a particular long statement in JavaScript into 2, you end it with an operator. So in this case, the operator is the equal sign. So please do that in your future coding. Now we move on to JavaScript CodeBlocks. Now, CodeBlocks, so we already mentioned that a computer program is a list of instructions that should be performed by the computer. Now, however, in JavaScript, you may have more than one statement that should be performed. So that's what you call a code block. So in JavaScript, you have to enclose a code block with a set or a pair of curly braces. So in this case here, you have function show info. These two are two statements in JavaScript. It is enclosed in curly braces. So that's what you call a code block. So in this case, what will happen is that these two will be performed should the function show info will be triggered, and that is when the button click me is hit. Now, so what happens here is that you have two placeholders. One is sample1, the other one is sample2. It doesn't contain any initial value, but when click me is clicked, okay, or triggered, it will call show info, which is a function that will display or change the value of your placeholder sample1, which is the first rather the second paragraph, but the first one that has a place or ID that's called sample1, it will be replaced by great news. And the second one, which is a placeholder identified as sample2, will be replaced with you are getting to know JavaScript. So have a look at what will happen here. So when click me is clicked, it will display great news, you are getting to know JavaScript. So this is a function. If you have noticed in the previous examples, we already placed a curly brace there because it's a good practice. But especially if you have more than one statement, there should be a curly brace, and that's what you call a code block. So that means all of the code inside that block, inside that pair of curly braces, will be performed once it is triggered. So once again, guys, I need you to try this one out. Try to see how you could do this on your own, and see how code block really benefits you, especially in understanding what happens when you click a particular button. Alright, so I hope you did that, and I hope that there were no errors. If there was an error, if it doesn't display correctly, I want you to review your code. Try to understand. Please do not copy exactly how it is. Try to experiment. What will happen if you change the function name? What will happen when you change the ID? Is it still going to work? And how do you specify that it is in that particular placeholder where you want the output to be displayed? Now, before I end this video, I'd like to share with you some reserved words. When you say reserved words, that means that these are words that already has a predefined meaning in JavaScript. And that means that you could not use this as the name of your variable, or you could not use this in any other way that is not understood by JavaScript. So please try to go over these reserved words. You might also want to check online about other reserved words in JavaScript. And before I end this video, I'd like to give you a summary of our discussion. We talked about the script tag, which was also again already used in other examples in JavaScript. So, but yeah, the script tag is very important for creating our JavaScript statements. And then you have your placement for the JavaScript, so putting it in the body and the head. So you were given examples on what happens when you put it in the body and the head. What's the implication? Will it run differently or not? And we also gave an example. I also gave you an example of how you do it if you're going to put your JavaScript externally, and what's the advantage of that. And perhaps the disadvantage is that you will have to put it on a separate file rather than putting it inside your HTML code. So we discussed that the beauty about it is that you are able to separate your JavaScript, or just like you separate your CSS from your HTML code, and that makes everything a lot easier to understand or to debug. Now, we also discussed about the different ways you could generate output in JavaScript, the most common being inner HTML. And then we also discussed other options such as document.write, window.alert, or the synonym, which is just alert, omitting the word window. We also learned how to display the outputs in your console, which is useful only when debugging. And we also learned how to print, or see a preview of the entire page using your window.print option. Now, we also understood quite deeply what is a JavaScript statement and how is it different from code blocks. And we also learned about the reserved words which you could not use as a variable name because they already have a predefined meaning in JavaScript. So with that, I hope that you learned a lot in this discussion. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in my next video.